The Young and the Restless. Spoilers Fridays. Full episodes the 27th of March 2026. The air in Genoa City had changed again, and in a place like this, people usually felt that shift long before they could explain it. It was there in the pauses between conversations, in the guarded glances across polished restaurant tables, in the way old enemies suddenly seemed too calm and old friends seemed too careful. Nothing in this city ever truly stayed buried, and no secret ever remained untouched once power, guilt, and wounded pride began pulling at it from different directions. That was why the newest wave of tension did not arrive like a single explosion. It spread quietly, threading itself through old heartbreaks and fresh suspicions, through shattered trust and dangerous ambition, until the whole city seemed to be holding its breath. Audra and Noah were speaking again. Holden had fixed his eyes on Kyle and Claire's growing alliance with the kind of focus that never led anywhere good. Nikki had reached out to Kane with information that could rip open old wounds tied to Lily and the kidnapping scam. And Kane, once forced to live with questions he could never fully answer now, stood at the edge of revelations strong enough to change everything he thought he knew. None of these developments existed in isolation. In Genoa City, they never did. Every fragile reconnection and every whispered confession had the power to trigger something larger, something darker, something that could turn personal pain into a citywide reckoning. For Audra and Noah, the idea of reconnecting should have felt simple on the surface. It should have looked like two people older, more aware of themselves, trying to revisit something unresolved with a little more maturity than they once had. But nothing involving them had ever been simple, because what had broken between them was not just timing or circumstance. It was trust, perception, and the kind of emotional injury that leaves both people convinced they were the one who understood the truth more clearly. Noah had long carried his own version of Audra in his mind, one shaped by disappointment, unfinished anger, and the suspicion that whatever had once existed between them had been poisoned by calculation. Audra, meanwhile, had spent enough time surviving the judgments of others to know how easily people reduced her to the most convenient version of her character. She had built herself into someone sharper, harder, less willing to beg for understanding. That armor had served her in business and in war, but it had also left her carrying a loneliness she rarely let anyone see. Reconnecting with Noah meant risking something far more intimate than public defeat. It meant allowing someone who had once known her in a different life to look past the poise, the ambition, and the practiced confidence and see whether there was still something real underneath it all. That was what made their renewed contact so quietly compelling. It was not an immediate rush back into romance, nor some polished reconciliation where years of pain disappeared in a single evening. It was slower than that, more fragile, and more dangerous for being emotionally honest. There was history in every word they exchanged, but there was also restraint. Noah was not naive enough to forget the past, and Audra was too proud to pretend none of it had happened. Yet something in both of them seemed tired of carrying old resentment as if it were a form of protection. Noah had seen enough of life to understand that people were rarely as one-dimensional as the hurt they caused. Audra, for all her sharpness, had likely grown weary of always being approached as a threat before she could be seen as a person. So they moved toward each other cautiously, not as two people pretending the past never happened, but as two people acknowledging that it had shaped them in ways neither fully understood at the time. There was an uneasy tenderness in that. The possibility that what had once fallen apart in bitterness could now be re-examined through a more adult lens gave their connection weight, but it also made it volatile. Because when people reopen an emotional door they once slammed shut, they do not just risk hope, they risk pain, returning in a more sophisticated form. Noah's role in this dynamic mattered, because he had always represented something Audra could not easily manipulate without consequence. Other men might be seduced by her confidence, unsettled by her intelligence, or eager to challenge her edge, but Noah carried something different. He knew enough of her past to make pretense useless, and that forced a kind of honesty Audra often avoided because it left her exposed. If she was truly trying to move forward with him, it suggested that something inside her was shifting. Perhaps she was no longer satisfied with strategic relationships and temporary victories. Perhaps she wanted to be chosen in a way that had nothing to do with leverage, status, or control. But wanting that did not mean she knew how to achieve it without sabotaging herself. Audra had spent too long in environments where vulnerability was punished and attachment became a weakness others exploited. Rebuilding anything with Noah would require her to confront that pattern, and that alone made the storyline emotionally rich. Because the greatest obstacle between them might not be the past itself, but the habits they developed in order to survive it. Noah, on the other hand, would have his own quiet fears. A man can tell himself he is willing to revisit an old connection, but the body remembers disappointment long before the mind decides to forgive it. He may want to believe Audra has changed, or perhaps that he has changed enough to meet her differently. But trust rarely returns in a straight line. It flickers. It retreats. It asks for proof, then questions the proof once it appears. If Noah felt himself being drawn back toward Audra, some part of him would almost certainly resist, not because he did not care, but because caring again would mean admitting that the old feelings never truly died. And if that was true, then all the distance, all the anger, all the years spent moving on had not erased the bond as completely as he once told himself. That realization alone could make him wary. Sometimes people fear not the person who hurt them, but the version of themselves that still wants them, despite everything. While Audra and Noah tried to step through the emotional minefield of unfinished history, another storm was building elsewhere in Genoa City, one rooted less in regret than in strategy. Holden Novak had begun turning his attention toward the alliance between Kyle Abbott and Claire Grace Newman, and from the moment that happened, the entire situation took on a more sinister edge. Kyle and Claire were becoming stronger together, and strength in this city always attracts attack. Their connection, whether personal, strategic, or something dangerously balanced between both, represented a shift in power that people like Holden were never going to ignore. Kyle was an Abbott, sharpened by family, expectations, mistakes, and the constant pressure of living inside a legacy that demanded brilliance while punishing weakness. Claire, as a Newman, carried her own charged history, layered with trauma, manipulation, and the suffocating gravity of one of Genoa City's most dominant bloodlines. If those two were truly forming an alliance that mixed loyalty, instinct, and mutual understanding, then they were becoming more than a pairing. They were becoming a threat to anyone who benefited from division. Holden understood that. Men like him always understand the danger of unity before anyone else does because their power depends on destabilizing it. The growing closeness between Kyle and Claire may have looked promising, to some even hopeful, but to Holden it likely looked like a structure that needed to be weakened before it could fully harden. That was why his intentions were so troubling. Sabotage in Genoa City is rarely blunt. It is intimate. It enters through doubt, pride, jealousy, and carefully timed misinformation. Holden would not need to destroy Kyle and Claire directly if he could simply convince each of them to question the other at precisely the wrong moment. That is how these things are done. A private comment placed where insecurity is already growing. A piece of information delivered with enough truth to feel credible and enough distortion to become poisonous. A conflict framed not as an attack from outside, but as a betrayal from within. Holden did not need brute force. He only needed patience and a clear understanding of where each crack might begin. Kyle was particularly vulnerable because he had always lived with competing impulses. On one hand, he wanted to be taken seriously, to be seen as his own man rather than the sum of Abbott privilege and past mistakes. On the other, he had often been driven by emotion more than he wanted to admit, especially when pride and personal loyalty became entangled. If Claire had become important to him, then Holden's sabotage would not simply threaten an alliance. It would threaten Kyle's sense of judgment. He would begin to wonder whether he had trusted too quickly, opened up too far, built something meaningful on unstable ground. That self-doubt could make him reactive, and reactivity is always the opening an enemy wants. A single misstep, a single accusation delivered in anger, and Holden's work would already be half done. Claire's vulnerability would be different but no less potent. She had lived under manipulation before. She knew what it meant to be used, shaped, and pulled into battles bigger than herself. That history may have made her stronger, but it also meant betrayal would strike a deeper nerve. If Holden targeted her, he would almost certainly exploit that psychological scar, nudging her toward the fear that no alliance in Genoa City ever exists without conditions. If she began to suspect Kyle's motives, or worse, if she believed herself once again to be a pawn in someone else's game, the damage could spread quickly. Claire had every reason to crave authenticity now, and that same craving could make deception cut even deeper. Holden's most effective weapon might not be force at all, but the ability to make her feel that the one place where she was beginning to find steadiness was built on illusion. That kind of attack is devastating because it does not just fracture relationships, it destabilizes identity. And then there was Nikki. In any other city, a call from Nikki Newman might have sounded like concern or family diplomacy or one more effort to clean up the emotional wreckage left behind by people she loved. In Genoa City, a call from Nikki carries history with it. It carries weight. And when she reached out to Kane Ashby with a crucial secret involving Lily Winters, the atmosphere around the city shifted instantly. Nikki was not a woman who revealed something significant lightly, especially not when it touched on Lily and a kidnapping scam that already carried the stench of betrayal and long-shadowed manipulation. Whatever she told Kane, it was serious enough to reopen wounds that never healed properly and explosive enough to alter the emotional map of several lives at once. The revelation about Lily mattered not only because of its content, but because of what it forced Kane to confront. Kane had lived through the kidnapping scam as more than a storyline. For him, it was emotional carnage, a knot of guilt, confusion, and rage tied to one of the ugliest chapters in his life. Scams of that kind do not end when the facts are known. They linger in memory as violation. They leave every later revelation feeling like another theft. So if Nikki uncovered or chose to expose a secret now, it meant the story had never really settled. Something foundational had either been hidden, misrepresented, or ignored. And Kane, who may have already spent years reshaping his understanding of Lily the past and his own failures, would suddenly be dragged back into that storm with no guarantee that the truth would bring peace. In Genoa City, truth often wounds more cleanly than lies, but it still wounds. Kane's reaction would have to be seismic, because this was not the sort of information a man absorbs quietly. If Nikki's confession suggested Lily knew more than he realized, withheld something crucial, or was connected to the kidnapping scam in ways he had never allowed himself to imagine, then Kane's sense of the past would begin to collapse in real time. It would not be only about anger toward Lily. It would be about humiliation, about wondering how much of his life was shaped by narratives he accepted because they were emotionally convenient. Kane had already suffered enough from the instability of love, loyalty, and public scandal. To now face the possibility that the woman who once stood at the center of so much of his emotional life was tied to something darker would ignite not only fresh anger but grief of a more existential kind. Because when a person's memory of love becomes contaminated by suspicion, they are not just losing faith in another person, they are losing faith in their own ability to ever have read that person correctly. Lily, though not physically present in every confrontation, would become the emotional axis around which all of this turned. That was what made Nikki's move so dangerous. Lily was not just a name in the secret. She was the person whose history with Kane gave the secret its emotional force. If the revelations cast Lily in a morally compromised light, then every old moment between them would be reinterpreted. Every sacrifice, every reconciliation, every parting, every silent wound would suddenly feel vulnerable to a harsher reading. Kane would ask himself whether Lily had protected him, deceived him, or simply failed him when honesty mattered most. Nikki, for her part, may have believed she was doing the right thing by telling him now, but even righteous truth-telling can carry collateral damage. By reaching out, she was not just passing on information. She was detonating a memory field. What makes Nikki's involvement especially compelling is that she herself has spent years living in the crossfire between love, loyalty, and the catastrophic choices of powerful people. She understands better than almost anyone the cost of secrets kept too long. So if she decided that Kane needed to know, there was likely a moral urgency behind it. But morality in Genoa City is never clean. Nikki's truth could protect one person while destroying another. It could bring clarity while also reopening shame. It could be an act of conscience and a catalyst for chaos at the same time. That ambiguity is exactly what makes her such a potent figure in moments like this. She does not act lightly, but when she acts, consequences ripple far beyond her original intention. As Kane reeled from the revelations, the city around him would begin to respond in that uniquely Genoa City way where personal shock immediately becomes communal tension. Old feuds do not stay contained there, they evolve. They attract opportunists, defenders, family loyalists, and those who simply cannot resist using chaos to reposition themselves. The emotional temperature rises because everyone senses when a crack in one story may expose fractures in others. Holden's sabotage campaign, Audra and Noah's uneasy reconnection, Kyle and Claire's strengthening bond, Nikki's secret, Kane's outrage, Lily's shadow over it all, none of these plots remain separate for long. They begin to touch each other in subtle ways, and once that happens, the city itself seems to become more volatile. That is the true nature of Genoa City at times like this. It is not merely a setting. It behaves like a living organism fed by memory and ambition. Old resentments surface the moment they smell new weakness. Unexpected alliances form because survival often demands compromise with people one would normally avoid. The people at the center of the current turbulence may believe they are managing one personal crisis at a time, but the truth is that every move they make is now part of a larger emotional chessboard. Audra reconnecting with Noah may look private, yet if that relationship strengthens, it shifts the social and emotional balance around several other players. Holden attacking Kyle and Claire may seem like a targeted strike, but if he succeeds, the fallout could embolden others with their own agendas. Nikki's revelation to Kane may appear to concern only old pain, but old pain in this city is political currency. Once released, it is never just pain anymore. It becomes leverage, judgment, and motive. Perhaps the cruelest part of all this is that several of these characters are genuinely trying in their own imperfect ways to move forward. Noah may truly want peace. Audra may truly want a chance to be seen differently. Kyle and Claire may genuinely believe that their alliance can withstand pressure if they remain honest with each other. Nikki may sincerely think the truth, however painful is better than one more layer of deception. Even Kane's fury may come from the wounded desire to finally understand the life that was shaped for him without his consent. But in Genoa City, sincere intentions are often the very things predators exploit. Holden does not need Audra and Noah to fail because they are weak. He only needs them to be human. He does not need Kyle and Claire to betray each other deliberately. He only needs them to doubt under pressure. And the truth Nikki delivers does not need to be false to become destructive. It only needs to arrive at the moment when old scars are already tender enough to split open again. The emotional force of this story lies in that collision between hope and sabotage. Audra and Noah represent a fragile possibility that damaged people can revisit the past without repeating it exactly the same way. Kyle and Claire represent the kind of alliance that might actually grow stronger if nurtured correctly, but also more dangerous to those who feel excluded by it. Nikki and Cain embody a different kind of reckoning, one where truth comes too late to spare innocence and too sharply to preserve peace. Lily remains the unseen center of gravity, her name capable of changing moods, memories, and loyalties with a single revelation. Holden, meanwhile, thrives precisely because he understands that people in transition are easiest to break. He is the embodiment of what Genoa City always produces when vulnerability begins to look like opportunity. By the time all these threads fully tighten, the city may find itself in a place where no one feels entirely safe inside the stories they believed about themselves. Noah may realize that forgiving Audra is far easier than trusting what forgiveness awakens in him. Audra may discover that wanting something real demands sacrifices her old survival instincts resist. Kyle may be forced to decide whether Claire is someone he truly believes in or merely someone he wants beside him while things are easy. Claire may have to face the terrifying possibility that intimacy and danger still travel together in her life no matter how careful she tries to be. Cain may stare at the ruins of old love and wonder whether betrayal was hidden in places he once called destiny. Nikki may be left carrying the familiar burden of having told the truth and still watching everything fall apart anyway. That is why the tension in Genoa City feels so sharp right now. It is not built only on scandal, it is built on emotional timing. People are reconnecting, plotting, confessing, and unraveling all at once. Old wounds are being reopened at the same moment new alliances are trying to form. The city is becoming a pressure chamber where affection, suspicion, vengeance, and regret are all rising together. And when that happens, the outcome is rarely tidy. Someone always says too much. Someone always believes the wrong thing at the worst possible moment. Someone always makes a choice that feels justified in pain and catastrophic in hindsight. In the end, what makes this chapter so gripping is not just the secrets or the sabotage. It is the sense that every character involved is standing at a threshold. Audra and Noah are trying to decide whether the past deserves a second reading or should remain buried. Holden is choosing destruction because he cannot tolerate the growth of something he cannot control. Kyle and Claire are learning whether a bond forged in a dangerous city can survive contact with calculated malice. Nikki is proving once again that truth can be an act of courage and still feel like violence when it lands. Cain is being forced to revisit a history that may now look uglier than he ever imagined. And Lily, whether she wants it or not, is becoming the name around which a fresh storm gathers. Genoa City always survives its storms, but survival there never means innocence. It means scars, changed loyalties, and the quiet understanding that every relationship has just been tested by forces larger than pride alone. As old grudges rise and unexpected alliances take shape, the people at the center of this drama may still believe they can control the damage. But cities like this do not reward confidence for long. They reward whoever can read the emotional weather before the lightning hits. And right now, the sky over Genoa City looks ready to break.